This is Hello everyone and welcome back to our 25th online wine tasting. We're a little bit behind the beer tastings because we did those every week all through summer, and we took the wine tastings to bi-weekly, but we're still here. We're still doing amazing wine tastings, and I think we have a really knockout lineup for you this week. We are going to go back to that same old well. We are going to go back to the area around Lake Garda. So here's our map that I printed off the internet and then marked up with Sharpies. So let's walk through this a little bit. So there is Venice. There's the Adriatic Sea. Tuscany be down here someplace. But here's Lake Garda. Now, on this map, we're going to talk about a few regions. Is that my phone? Here.
Just turn it down.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay,
That's
there you
me.
go.
There we go. Apparently I left my volume on my phone like an idiot. I always check that, not this week. So let's talk about this area. We've been to this well a few times. When we talked about Prosecco, that's all through here. When we talk about Northeast Italian Pinot Grigio, including the Ramato styles, they're all from through here. Here on this map, here's the River Adige. The Alto Adige is the upper reaches of that river. If we go a little bit to the east of Venice here, we end up in the Collio Hills, which is that really famous Sauvignon Blanc region that borders up on Slovenia. I get so angry because whenever people talk about Italy, it's like, oh, well, there's Tuscany and then everything else. No, that's just fucking stupid. There's so much more going on with Italy, and we're in this tiny little corner that not that many people really talk about, and yet there's so much going on here. There's Soave down here. There's the Valpolicella country through here, which of course also makes Repassos and Amarones and Reciotos. Right against the coast of Lake Garda here, there is Bardolino, which we'll talk about in a second. And then down here, kind of hugging the southern tip. And yes, this is Custoza, but let's remember through all of this, all these regions we're talking about, they grow Glera here for Prosecco, they grow Pinot Grigio here for Bianco and Rosé Pinot Grigio or Ramato Pinot Grigio. There's so much happening in this region and it's so alive. We're not even talking about the fact that if we were a little further north, you get into the Dolomite Mountains, the Terre Dolomiti, where there's this super cool like Bordeaux style blend thing going on up there. It's just such an incredible part of Italy. Now, speaking of incredible things, we also have an incredible guest tonight. We are joined by Warren Walden of Black Sheep Wine Imports. Hello, Warren.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you here.
It's
now,
pretty exciting. This is my first online tasting that I've done since COVID, so it's nice to be able to talk about wines with people again.
it is. I've not stopped. I have not shut up about wine this whole time. And have I done this tasting once before? No, I have not done this tasting. In fact, other than the very first one, I've never tasted any of these wines before. But as we'll get into, as I told Warren, like the moment I tasted the second white wine tonight, I was like, we're doing an online tasting because this is just a white wine that's literally made for me. This part of the world, the reason that we've talked about this so much, we have talked about Repassos, we have talked about Soaves, we've talked about Valpolicella. We've never had Amarone on the show because, my God, we do have a budget, folks. We've talked about Ramato Pinot Grigio. We've talked about Prosecco. We've talked about all this. It all comes from the same bloody area of Italy. At some point, we're going to bring on the San Leonardo wines, probably in the new year, and they're going to be those Dolomite Mountains to the north that I talked about. There's just so much different wine in this region, and I've probably missed a few. I know Frascati comes from somewhere up in here. I didn't talk about it because Frascati's bloody boring, but there's a lot going on here. Warren, we're going to pour the Gorgo Custoza, the baseline Custoza, which we've poured before. We poured this for our good value wine tasting. Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and a little bit about Gorgo as a winery?
I met Gorgo 2 years ago in November, actually. So, and the wines have been in the market here for almost just about 2 years. They landed in around January, February. Timing was perfect. The wines have done spectacular, and they fit my portfolio perfectly. So my backgrounds are, I worked in the restaurant industry for years and years. And I've got a lot of other things in my background as far as project coordination, construction work, retail work, as well as restaurants. And I started Black Sheep after I left the the restaurant industry. Got actually kind of roped into working as a wine rep, or I say roped into, and it's kind of like people used to tell me I was coming over to the dark side, and I said, well, no, this is actually the light side. I'm a lot more relaxed and a lot less stress.
No, it's the dark side because you work less ridiculous hours than everyone else.
Yeah,
except when you don't.
Like, I'm a lot more relaxed than I was as a restaurant manager for sure. And then over the years, like this is going back, started working in restaurants when I was about 16, and a couple of other things, took a little hiatus for a while, came back to it. And then when I was living up in Banff, started studying my small A studies as I started working with bigger wine lists, and kind of fell in love with wine. And they say everybody has an epiphany wine that really strikes them kind of emotionally. And with that, then it really took off for me. And then I started reading about wines on my own. Started working up at the Rimrock in Eden in the Rimrock in Banff. Started studying with the ISG, and then finished my studies up there. And then from there moved on. Went out to Vancouver Island, took over food and beverage program at a little boutique hotel out there, and came back, opened a big fancy restaurant called Rush in Calgary. And then from there, I got recruited into the side of being a wine rep, and kind of fell in love with it, and made sense to me. And from working from Trialto, I worked for them for about 4 years, and eventually started managing the liquid art program, which was their super boutique side of things.
It was the super geeky side of Trialto. Yeah,
some of the most stunning wines, and absolutely some of the most incredible wines from Italy in particular. That a guy named John Thomason, he was one of the people responsible for bringing some of the best Italian wines into Western Canada in the first place. And through that, diverse portfolio, and it merged with two other agencies that I was working with under the umbrella of Trialto. And in the beginning, I think we started out with about 900 different wines in the list there. So it's a lot of inventory to keep track of. And learned a ton. And then gentleman named Paul Martsukos, he owns Tannin Fine Wines, another small little agency, and he's kind of the king of Greek wines in the market. His father's Greek, and he had a dream to move his family to Greece for a year, and that's where I came in. He hired me to run his business while he was gone. Learned all the other skills that I need to, and eventually, my ex-wife, we were married at the time, prodded me. She said, it's time for you to do this on your own. So that's when I started Black Sheep. So it's been 5 years ago. Actually, right now, 5 years ago, it was late November, my first wines in the market landed, which I believe you have some of the Irish wines on the shelf there.
Yep.
From Oregon. And it was a family trip, intended to be a trip with some other family friends.
Actually, kind of funnily, 5 years on, you finally sold me on the red. I've been carrying the Pinot Gris for 5 years, basically since our first meeting. 5 years on, I finally picked up the damn red. You've been only pitching it for 5 years.
They're kind of fit me to a T. I also discovered, picked up a couple other little small California producers on that trip. It was intended to be a family surf trip with meet up some other friends down in Oregon and go surfing, and kind of started doing a little bit of that. But I looked at my wife at the time and said, hey, we're only 6 hours from Mendocino, let's head south. So extended the trip, and off we went, and came back, and that was the beginning of Black Sheep.
Awesome.
And then
there's actually about 3 or 4 things I really want to loop back to with the second wine, because I've got some real questions there that I do want to hit on, especially what was your epiphany wine. But for the folks at home, let's talk about our first wine tonight, the Gorgo Custoza, the baseline Custoza.
The entry-level Custoza, this has been an interesting wine. It's everybody in the area makes Pinot Grigio, of course, and to varying degrees. It's like from plonk, simple, almost water-like wines up to a little bit more craft, a little bit higher end wines and whatnot. all the way through. You get these varying characters. But I was there as a guest of the Consorzio of Custoza. And they were looking for representation for some small producers in the market, and met a number of people while I was there, and just had a wonderful time. And it was packed a whole lot of time. I was in Italy for 4.5 days. So it was a super tight trip. But it was in November, and that's the time as an agent to be out selling wine, so it's tough to be away. So I had to get back, and then let me circle back before we get into that. I forgot to mention a little bit more about Gorgo as a producer. So Gorgo, when I met them, I'm like, well, what does the name mean? And she says, oh, that's the name of the road we're on here is Gorgo. But I believe translation, it means like the sound of that water makes, gurgling water sort of thing. But the estate, it started up back, I believe, 1970 or 73 was when they first, I think their first release of wines was in 1973, but it's father-daughter team. I deal with Roberta, lovely lady, and her father, who I believe his name is Roberto. But they started it up, and it was kind of that romantic story where it's half the land was in Roberta's mother's family, half was in her father's family. When they married, it came together. And I'm not sure I'm supposed to advertise this as to promote the winery, but I believe her father was actually involved with the mafia when he was quite young. And made a clean break from that and decided, agriculture is where it's at, going to make wines. Started working the vineyards, made a clean break from that. So I kind of always jokingly say I make sure that I pay these people on time.
Well, yes.
You never know.
As you should, yes.
Yeah, so I believe they started with 30 hectares in a village called Sommacampagna. So basically it's right on the very outskirts of Verona, just on the edge. So it'd be kind of like the difference between like Calgary to Okotoks or Cochrane, where I live in. And even their mailing address is Verona, but it's this beautiful little property. And they lie within both Bardolino and Custoza. And the Custoza wines are, somewhat unknown in the market. People aren't aware of what they are, but it seemed, particularly this first wine that we're going to taste, the entry-level Custoza. It's a white blend. And everybody in Italy particularly kind of thinks of white wines in Italy are what you drink while you're waiting for the serious stuff while you're making the food, But in the case of a lot of character, as you know, there's a lot of great Italian wines out there, super interesting. And I like that the texture. I find Gorgo has a real knack for vibrant fruit and a telltale Italian acidity, which keeps them fresh and lively and nice dry finish on them, beautiful little wines. And the area itself is just stunning. So they've got, I think they started with 30 hectares. Now they have split between two different vineyards in the village of Sommacampagna, a total of 50 hectares. So they are a small producer.
Can we just, there's a lot we can circle back to for the next one, but I want to talk about this while it's still in our glasses, because otherwise I have to have a third glass of this. And I do have to drive home, Warren. Okay. So let's circle back. 'Cause as I recall, this is a blend of Garganega with Cortese and, is it Trebbiano di Toscana is the third grape on this?
Yes. And there's a little bit of Trebbianello and a little bit of Croce Manzoni as well. Everybody's favorite grapes. But
yes, everyone's favorite grape.
Yeah. These wines are, the entry-level wines are all stainless steel. Actually, all the first three, except for the last wine, are all stainless steel. So there's no oak used in them at all. And the first wine, it's just meant to be this beautiful, fresh, vibrant, very easy to enjoy, but, drink it on its own, or great with like things like shellfish, seafood, salads, fruits. Kind of like, this time of year, it's hard to complain about the weather. Like, I think yesterday it was 16 degrees where I'm at. But this is unbelievable for December. But I like to say, like, wines like this, you put them in your glass, it feels like it's a nice day.
It does.
Regardless of what the weather's doing outside.
So with Gargano, of course, that's the great grape behind Soave. Cortese, by any other name, is Gavi di Gavi. So these are wines with a long-running history in this part of Italy, as it is. Mm-hmm. Trebbiano, of course, is Trebbiano.
They call this varietal is Bianca Fernanda. So once again, it's those different pseudonyms for the same varietals.
Sorry,
But
say that
this one,
again? I didn't catch that. I was coughing.
Bianca Fernanda is another, I believe what they call Cortese in this area, actually.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's
but it's
fascinating.
still the same bottles. Yeah, yeah. So just it's funny, like you travel around, you talk to different people, and it's like wherever they are, they may have a different name for the same varietal, but it's always some farmer comes along and goes, "Oh, I know, don't know, that's this grape that I grow over there," and we call it something else.
It's just like Grenache being called Cana now on Sardinia or what have you. Yes.
Yeah, certainly,
Absolutely.
certainly. One part, like, out of how many varietals of grapes do we have in Italy alone? Like, a couple of thousand for sure. It's unbelievable. So people wonder, you don't know all the varietals of grapes? It's like, no.
No one does. Jancis Robinson doesn't know all the varietals of grapes.
Oh, so that's part of the fun of wine, is there's always something new and something interesting to learn. So it's, but this wine itself, this really grabbed me. It's just like, you'll see a certain continuity through all of the wines that Gorgo makes, where, as they say, they have this really bright, lively, vibrant fruit. And talking with Roberta, they got their organic certification in 2018, and it was about 4 years leading up to that they started working with organics. And they do have a consulting winemaker who was actually, believe at one point, was the president of the Consorzio of Custoza as well. And so he's been very familiar with the land, and he's always worked with, the same age as her father. And her father was funny. It's when I met him out in the vineyards, he's wearing the fedora on his head, and he's wearing like the tweed jacket, and he doesn't speak any English, and he's very soft-spoken and you get that mafioso feeling. Really interesting guy. But the wines themselves, Roberta was telling me that the vibrancy of the nose, the fruit, the aromatics, everything came alive when they really transitioned over the organics. And the other thing, we're going to see incoming shipments from Gorgo. All the wines are going to be labeled on the back. They are this way, but they're not labeled as such. It's becoming a more important thing in the market here for a lot of consumers, is they're actually vegan friendly as well.
That's wonderful news. Yes, that's absolutely something we get asked more than I would have thought. Yes.
Yeah. So you see, like, even the last wine, the Ca Nova, it doesn't actually have the organic stamp on it because it's 2016 vintage. So it was produced organically, but it wasn't certified at that time yet.
The one thing I'll say with this Custoza is, I'm, as you know, just an absolutely massive fan of Garganega. It's, after Riesling, my favorite grape. I absolutely adore the way it presents. I enjoy the incredibly crushingly high acidity. I enjoy the beeswax and the honeycomb. I love how rich and kind of apple pear the fruit is, and then just mid-pout it completely changes gears and goes into grapefruit and lemon, and then it almost finishes almost like lamb's wool, almost like a Chenin Blanc. This takes some of that, and then by adding the Gavi, it makes it just a touch less serious. It makes it lighter. It makes it fresher. It's Garganega, but less expensive than a good Garganega, and just fresher and prettier and lighter. And I appreciate that, because it's great white wine without having to be necessarily pretentious or expensive. Now, I did actually do some reading for this before. I dipped into the Oxford Wine Companion and looked up Custoza, and it's the world's tiniest little paragraph. It's like, they make fairly boring neutral wines. Don't bother. And it's like, no, there's so much more interesting going on.
Like, I think when I was there, I visited producers from Gorgo being on the smaller side of it we went to a big co-op producer, and we roll up in the van and we look, and I'm like, oh my God, those are the biggest wine tanks I've ever seen. And I think there was about 8 of them across in front, like out beside the building. And then as we were touring around, I look in behind, and I noticed those were the little tanks in front of the ones that are 6 times as big behind it. And I'm just thinking, geez. So, and of course the quality of the wines, it's the difference. And those aren't the producers that I like to work with. They're super commercial, and they have their merits, and and a lot of characters. It's like a lot of wines that are like gimmicky little, we call them critter brands and whatnot. They tend to be, I call them a gateway drug. They get people drinking wine, and then once they discover that, you realize, well, these wines don't actually pair with food because they have no structure. Whereas you get these small producers, you get the personality, you can taste where the grapes grow and whatnot. And going back to Garganega, like, I remember when I was new to wine and familiar with like the region of Soave, I was only, introduced to the wines that are high production,
We
valley
all
floor.
were. And let's be fair, that
Super
was
light.
all that came over. I mean, do you
Oh,
remember
yeah,
where
like-
you were when Puripan Suave came into the market and it was just a
That's-
revelation
that's
to everyone?
Yeah, but I mean, like their entry level wines are like you think, okay, I'd pair them with oysters, but they get lost with anything else. And then through working with particularly like the liquid art portfolio, we had some crazy high end producers, and you get to taste that hillside fruit, lower yields, and the wines would drink like with the texture of almost like a Merceau, a
I think that's
completely
very
different.
fair.
Opposite wine, but they were like, and that's when it opens your eyes. You're like, oh, and then when you get to go visit a place like this and see the wines, like the last day of my trip, we were spent the day with the president of the Consorzio of Custoza, and his project is called Cavalcina, and really like his wines as well. But it was interesting standing in his vineyard. He was telling us, he says, this was actually the battleground where Italy won independence over Austria. And he says, you look at the top of the hill and you can see the white tower up there. That's the village of Custoza. And then you look across the valley over there, and then you've got, that's the land, that's Valpolicella over there. And on the clear day, you can see the Alps over there, and Lake Garda's over there. And then you get to, that's when you really get that
Like,
impression.
I showed the map earlier, but this is a shockingly tiny little area. Like, this is not a lot of land.
It's tiny. It's tiny. Like, I think when I was there, we visited 12 or 15 producers. And as I say, the full range. And Gorgo, for everything, really struck a note with me. The wines are stunning. It's got that family story, lots of personality. And when I taste through a lineup of wines from a new producer, if you go, well, this one and this one are really good, this one's okay, and these ones are not so great, that's also an indication to me that this is a producer who can produce good wine every year with what they're given. And
I
as
agree
you
with
know,
that, yes.
you get producers, you have a troublesome vintage if you get a talented winemaker and viticulturist. They know how to handle these things, and they can always make good wine. They just don't make as much of it.
Cool. Let's jump into the second white here, the San Michelin. This is the wine that is the reason that we're doing this event. I mean, apart from yourself, Warren, obviously, but you know, this is the wine why I had to do this. It's Garganega or Garganega and Riesling together. My two favorite white varietals, done very well, done at a very affordable price. This is a wine that's basically tailor-made for me.
Yeah, this is so this is what they would call one of the cru wines. So they do two versions of Custoza. There's another one that's the partner to the San Michelin here. It's and I believe that's a little bit more masculine than this one. This I believe is from particularly rocky area, and with that, and it takes a little bit more time to let it settle down. So as I was mentioning, I was just putting together an order with Roberta this week, and she's just bottled her 2020 vintage of Custoza, her Pinot Grigio, or pardon me, the Custoza is being bottled by Christmas time, but this one isn't going to be done until I think later in January and or February. So it's, you know, it's a little more special wine. It's got a little bit more texture. It's got more finesse. When I tasted them, when I originally met this producer when I was in Italy, I fell in love with this wine, absolutely. But I saw the virtue of the consumer-friendly character of the entry-level Custoza. So that's why the San Michelin is a new entry. And I actually only brought in 15 cases to start with. So, you know, there's only a few places in Edmonton and you in Lethbridge. And
You bought 9 of them.
Yeah, I think there's one store in Calgary who's got it right now. So it's only been in the market for a few weeks now. And like I say, you were one of the first people to taste it. Like I'd been up in Edmonton tasting it around, and yourself, and that's about it. So it's brand new, and I do have more on the way. I think I've only got about 5 cases left right now.
Now, Craig asks, why don't they list the grape varietals on the bottle? Now, you can correct me here if you want, Warren, but the legal varietals that have to be in it or are recommended to be in it are Cortese, also known as Gavi, Garganega, Trebbiano, Pinot Grigio, and then beyond that, there's 20% that in this region, because it's a little bit more of an up-and-coming region, can be more or less whatever they want. So, Riesling di Toscana, which is its own unique variant of Riesling, is also allowed in the blend. But there's a lot of Custozas that use Chardonnay. There are a lot that use Sauvignon Blanc, because really, if we go any further east, we're into Sauvignon Blanc countries. We get close to those Collio Hills up in the Slovenian hills. really, the reason they don't put the grapes on the label is Gorgo probably owns some Chardonnay vines. There might be a tiny percentage in here.
Yeah, but they do own some. They do under their entry level. They do a bottle of straight Chardonnay, which I'm going to be bringing some of that in. I just tasted it recently. They actually do some. They do a Ripasso. They do an Amarone from the Valpolicella region, and I believe they purchased the grapes for that. But their two vineyards one is right on the estate, which is a beautiful little property, and the other one is in another part of the same village in Sommacampagna as well. But with this wine, you can taste the terroir, where that minerality, calcareous soil. It's like the land there. It's all glacial deposits there from the glaciers moving through and whatnot. So you get that kind of gravelly soil, siltiness, lots of high pH levels, and that lends to that Italian. When I blind taste on Italian wines, particularly the reds, it's like, what jumps out to you? It's the dirt and the acid.
It's the incredible acidity and then the slight salinity of the soil. Yes.
Yeah, I jokingly compare. I say Italian wines are like a donut. They're missing something. It's the food in the middle. You can't have them without food.
Well,
I'd say maybe.
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe Greek wines beyond Italian maybe crave food more, but I'm only familiar with that because I did a lot of work with Greek wines and now when Greek producers reach out to me with try and sell their wines for them, I say I'm a little hesitant because I know how hard they are to sell.
Hello, Deirdre.
On the palate.
I did want to, before we get to the reds, because we are a little behind schedule for the reds, not much. I did want to ask one question. You mentioned you had your epiphany wine. Now I actually know exactly what my epiphany wine was. What was yours?
Well, I think the wine that really struck me more emotionally than anything, I was actually in service and I opened this bottle for somebody, and I tasted it and I swear I heard violins playing in my head, and that was a DRC Richebourg. And it's from very special Pinot Noir from Burgundy. And but I think before that, when I really was touched by something, I remember somebody handed me open a bottle of Paradigm from California, and it was just like a high quality California wine. So when I got into this, really studying wines and falling in love with wines, I was very intimate with all the different appellations of throughout Napa, going all the way up, and I was at a point where I could blind taste. Oh, that's got to be St. Helena. That's got to be that's Howell Mountain fruit. That in France. And I used to work with a gentleman who I actually went through my diploma level studies with, and he was always on the Italian side, and I was more on the French side. And we'd joke with each other, and I'd say to Peter, I'm like, Peter, the best of Italian wines, they're made from French grapes too, right? So we'd have good laughs all the time. But then it was later on, because Italy is something special. So many complex regions, so many varietals, so much character. And then going back to what was said about why aren't the varietals on the labels? This is really traditional, I think, in Italy and Europe in general, like Italy and France. And there a lot of parts of France, you're not allowed to put the varietals on the label. You just have to know. Or if you asked a Frenchman, what does Cabernet Sauvignon taste like? Well, I don't know, but I know what Bordeaux tastes like.
Exactly.
So they look at it a different way. Whereas, like, it's kind of like I make the comparison. It's, a Frenchman would buy a bottle of wine like the average person would buy a car. It's like, oh, I like the way it looks. I like the way it feels. It costs this much money. It drives like that. Great. Do I need to know the compression ratios and the how they weld the doors and whatnot? It's the average person no. Whereas, like, in our world, we want to know, what's the barrel program for this wine? Like when if I ask a, European wine producer, I'm like, oh, what's your barrel program? Oh yeah, it goes in the barrels. What do you care? It's good. No, It's a totally different aspect.
I always look at it as a top-down versus bottom-up approach. On the bottom-up approach, like a North American style, it's like, well, what's the wine going to be like? Well, it's made from Cabernet. It's put in an oak barrel for 18 months, but it's a French oak barrel, so the oak program won't be as intense. It's bottled with all of its natural sediments, so you're expecting a premium wine. And they tell you at least most of that immediately up front. Whereas if you go to Barolo, it's like, well, okay, it's a Barolo. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, if you understand the region, it's like, well, it has to be Nebbiolo. It comes from the Barolo region, which is this one tiny hillside. You know, they can't release the wines till they're, what, 2.5 years old, 3.5 for reservas. It's got this whole history behind it. And rather than telling you everything from the start, telling you what goes into it, how it's done, everything, they say, well, this is what the wine region is. You should be able to infer from that what goes into it and what the steps that are taken to make that wine are. And if we're doing anything interesting or weird, like aging it in American oak, we'll tell you because it's different. It's
sure.
Bottom up versus top down, and it's a very different philosophy that I never like cut and dried things, but it almost is kind of cut and dried old world versus new world.
Oh, for sure. I think we get some of the best wines internationally when you combine both. When you get those, you know, people who are like, people in California who are going after the old world philosophy of expressing the terroir where the grapes grow. And it's more like it's a house style rather than we're just trying to chase a palate and points from somebody like Robert Parker.
Yes.
And fortunately, we're getting away from that more and more. But, you know, points are still important for somebody like myself. I don't drink them according to points. I don't buy them according to points. I don't sell them according to that. But
I think every time you've brought up points in the store, Devin and I have actually broken out into loud laughter, and you've just quietly hung your head and said, I won't bring up points again.
Yeah, but it's funny how you go into other outlets, people are all about that. Like when I worked in Banff, I worked at a traditional French restaurant. Because we have such transient staff there was scores from everybody all over the wine list. And then one day...
There are places where points are more valuable than the wines, and there are places where points don't matter, and that's the whole industry.
It was completely... It was a tool that was good for, you know, staff who didn't know a lot about wine without having to call the maitre d' every time you want to sell a bottle of wine. But every once in a while, you get somebody say, well, there's this wine, and this one's like 91 points and this one's 92 points, but the one that's 92 is you know $100 cheaper than the one that's 91. Why should I buy that? I'm like, you got me. But I tell you what, if I open the bottle and I put both glasses side by side, you tell me what you think. So, you know, to me, ultimately, what's the most important thing about wine? It's what's in the glass, right?
Absolutely. So let's jump right along to the Bardolino. Fun story actually about that Epiphany wine. You mentioned working for Trialto. I actually had Cam Nicholson down here not that long ago, about 2.5 weeks ago. He was down hanging out with us, and he and I actually had an epiphany moment at the same tasting. It was at a Corton Charlemagne tasting, probably about 10 years ago. We were both, I didn't actually see him there. I knew Cam at the time, but I didn't see him at the event. And it was this incredible Corton Charlemagne tasting put on by, might have been Drouin. But for those of you who don't know, Corton Charlemagne is kind of as close to the ultimate expression of Burgundian Chardonnay as exists. Corton Charlemagne, a bad example, will set you back $180. A decent example is $300. Like, Corton Charlemagne is stupidly priced. We don't sell it in the store for obvious reasons. But it is the perfect expression of Chardonnay, and it was my very first, like, mind-melting, oh my god moment about wine, was at this tasting where I was having multiple vintages in a couple of different vineyards of the same wine. It was all Burgundy, it was all Chardonnay, it was all within a year or two of each other, and every wine was absolutely night and day different from each other, and yet they were all absolutely brilliant. That was my epiphany moment for wine. And I wanted to ask you about yours, because when you brought it up, it was like, and then you immediately brought up Trialto after. It's like, I have a nice tie-in for this. But yeah, no, those epiphany moments. Devin has one, I have one. Everybody who does this for long enough, we all have that, and we know exactly where we were and exactly who was around. We actually had someone who worked here named Cassandra, who some of our very longest term customers might remember. She works in a high-end wine shop out in Vancouver now. She actually was the one who came with me to that tasting for Corton Charlemagne. And I believe for her, it is still her wine epiphany moment as well. So, no, it's one of those things where you have that day where every single thing in wine just opens up, and it's quite a moment.
I remember it was funny because, as I mentioned, it's like I was totally blown away when I got to taste Riesborg, and the history behind those wines, the character. And you're right, it's like you drive through like the Côte de Nuit, and it's like every 5 kilometers down the road, same varietals but totally different wines,
Completely different
and
wines.
I was in Burgundy, and I remember we were driving around, and I'm like, we're driving around the vineyards in this little van, and I'm taking pictures all over the place, and I was like, stop the van, I got to get out and take pictures of this. And I'm like, oh, by the way, I'd said earlier on, I'm like, if anybody sees the vineyard of Riesborg, stop, I have to see this vineyard. And so we're like, stop the van and get out. I'm like, oh, can you take a picture of me standing beside this wall? And then it's like my friends were like looking at me like he doesn't know. He didn't notice. And I'm standing there, and then I look down at the wall, and there's the little plaque, and it says Riesborg.
Oh
And I
yeah.
lost it. And I actually kissed the wall. I have a picture of me kissing the wall. But it's things. It's so weird, but it's like people like yourself would understand. But when we taste something from this place and it touches you so deeply emotionally, and it's something special for sure.
All right, so let's jump into Bardolino. Now, Bardolino on our map is this reddish region here. Valpolicella is all this goldish region here. If everyone is pointing out that, yes, these are just the Sharpies you bought to make the Advent calendars, Kyle, yes, you're absolutely right. These are the Sharpies I bought to make the Advent calendars. But Bardolino and Valpolicella share a couple of things in common. For one, they're right next to each other. For two, they use the exact same blend. They use Rondinella, Molinara, and most importantly, they use Corvina. And when I'm looking at this, I would say, okay, well, unless something really dramatic happens over here, and spoiler warning, it does, I would assume that the grapes that are right against Lake Garda, which is in summer going to act as a mirror, and it's going to reflect light back up in the vines, and in winter it's going to act as a heat sink, and it's actually going to reflect heat back up into the vines to keep the grapes warmer, or rather the vines warmer so they don't freeze. I would assume that Bardolino would be the more famous, the more historic, the more high-quality region, the better known one, the one that everybody knew. But it's exactly the opposite of what's true. Everybody knows Valpolicella. We all know Ripasso. I would wager most people would even suggest Recioto before Bardolino, to say nothing of Amarone, which is probably the most famous wine from Valpolicella. Why is Bardolino always the bridesmaid and never the bride there, Warren? Why is, for a lot of people, this the very first Bardolino they've ever had?
Absolutely. Well, I think in our world, for one, there's only a handful of Bardolinos in the market to start with. And so it's from our perspective where we are, it's what we're exposed to. Like we were talking about Suave, and in the beginning, it's just these cheap Valley Floor fruit and whatnot. And I think it's also because people in our market, like Alberta meat and potatoes country, it's usually once you get more into the wines, the Amarone is like, you're like, oh, first time you taste it when you're getting into wines and you like the big wines. It's like, I like to think of everybody tastes wines on like we go in a circle where when you're young and you taste your parents' wine, it's like maybe a little bit sweeter, off-dry whites or something like that. And then when you start drinking wine, you start to get into the big wines, like whether it's Aussie Shiraz or it was California Cab, or everybody gets stuck in Malbec for a long time, which I think people are finally moving on to that and discovering the virtues of Spain and Portugal and whatnot.
Actually, for my money, it's been a push towards Italy, finally.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I actually, we discussed this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but for a very long time, our Italian section was purely for decoration. We had one because we were a wine store, but we dusted it every 6 months, and it was as far as our Italian section went. Now we're actually selling Italy again, and it's fun again.
Oh yeah, this to me is kind of like where you get into that, like it's when people come around from those big, bold fruit primary wines getting into, and then they discover wine with food and the finesse of like Pinot Noir and it's funny when you cross over to Italy and you think, like, they say, well, Barolo is the Pinot Noir of Italy, but you don't understand that until if you have the opportunity to drink really old, really mature Barolos, when they start to get that delicate character and they're not all tannin. But when you go to, like, comparing Bardolino to Valpolicella, I think part of that is the Amarones and the Repassos appeal to, the Alberta meat and potatoes palate, where they're like these big, full, bold, fruit dominant wines that are kind of a little bit more in your face. And the Valpolicella is like the delicate, and usually when we get introduced to them, when you're just venturing, like, people know of Valpolicella and they know of Chianti and they know of Barolo and such, and they forget everything else. But Bardolino is one of those, like, little gems where I'd say, as a generalization, Bardolino to Valpolicella is Bardolino's a little bit more feminine, a little bit more pretty, a little bit more elegant. Same style of wine, same varietals, but it's like that's where it comes into that, as you say, the difference between, like, within Burgundy, which is a very small area, that every little village has its own character to them. So you're going to get those different characters, and you're right with the this giant lake right there. You get that more consistency. It's like it kind of stabilizes the temperatures and the climate around there. So it helps it along. So yeah, in answer to your question, why is it not as famous? I don't know. But I'm pretty happy to have these. And I have tasted some wines that Gorgo makes some wines from the Valpolicella region, which I believe she's purchasing grapes from there. They're stunning, but they're also a lot more expensive.
Yeah. I will say, for a lot of these, I mean, why are the wines of the upper Garonne, not as well known as Bordeaux? It's because the Bordelais put massive taxes on them. Like, why do we not all drink Gaillac? Because of taxes. Why does nobody drink wine from Castilla y Leon until recently? Because they never put a railroad there in Spain. For Bardolino, one thing I really appreciate about it is, in Valpolicella is the entry-level wine. They're not there to sell you Valpolicella for the most part, apart from wines like this, and this is a real trend in Valpol as well as doing, proper non-appassimento wines. But let's leave that aside for now. They're not there to sell you Valpol. They don't want to sell you a wine at $16.95. They want to sell you a wine at $22 for the Ripasso or $45 for the Amarone. In Bardolino, they don't really have that appassimento tradition. There's probably some wines made that way there. I'll take this one step back. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about at all here, which we wildly glossed over, Warren, we probably should have talked about this. Appassimento is the process of basically taking these grapes, your Corvina, your Rondinella, your Molinara, and drying them right down to the point of raisins, and then making wine from that. That is what Amarone is. Amarone literally means big bitter. It is a big high alcohol wine that's also dry. Ripasso is literally taking a wine like this Bardolino, a very light, very delicate wine, and then taking the leftovers of that Amarone, these raisins that they've crushed what liquid they can out of them, but you can't crush them too hard, because if you crush the grape seeds, you'll introduce bitterness, and then the wine will be ruined. So you have this fabulously, ludicrously expensive juice sitting in these grape skins you can't press out. Well, how do you get out? We just put a bunch of light wine over it and then mix it really good. That's literally Ripasso. It's soaking this really expensive, super concentrated juice out of these grape skins by introducing a less concentrated wine on top of it and just letting it mix. That's Ripasso. Now, Ripasso, as you can understand, is a wildly variable beast. You can put in 95% of those dried grape skins and 5% fresh juice and end up with a Ripasso that's almost unmistakably an Amarone, but it's slightly lighter. Or you can do the opposite. You can take 5% of those concentrated grape skins and put in 95% fresh juice, and the wine is like a Valpolicella, but slightly better. Ripasso is an incredibly variable and very unpredictable category. You really can't say what you're going to get with Ripasso. What I like about Bardolino is that whole process, well, we're going to make most of our money selling Amarone, or we're going to make most of our money selling Ripasso, it's not there. Are there wineries in Bardolino that do that style? Yes, there are, but they aren't the predominant style. Bardolino mostly survives by selling the base style, which means they have to care about the grapes, they have to care about the winemaking for the lighter wines, which is absolutely something you see at higher end wineries in Valpolicella, yes, but it's not what you'd see at Bola or Massey or Zanato or any of the big cats. That's not what they do. Would you say that's fair?
I think so, for sure. I think Ripasso is kind of very Italian in the way where it's like nothing goes to waste.
And that's what I like about Ripasso is, yeah, it's very much nothing goes to waste. And whatever doesn't go into the Ripasso goes into Grappa. And actually, after it becomes Ripasso, it goes into Grappa sometimes.
I think a lot of Ripassos, and I'm sure you'd agree, is like, I completely agree. There's a wide range of them, and a lot of them that we see on the commercial varietals, it's like it's something there to make money at, and it's poor man's Amarone. For people who like the Amarone, you save that for that's Dad's birthday wine, so we're gonna drink it then. But it's Saturday night, we're gonna have the Ripasso. But in a lot of ways, it's like people will look at it and it's like it's kind of contrived. It's kind of but it's like. Having said that, it's like there's some very special ones which are incredible.
I do want to actually loop back to that just for a sec, because that's something we haven't touched on through 25 tastings. We haven't really touched on some of the cynicism. And okay, I'm a cynical bastard. Like that's become bleedingly clear across 25 wine tastings. But some of that cynicism where, yes, you and I are trained wine professionals, but we still like openly talk about things like, yep, this is Dad's birthday wine. That's what this is. This is a very Calgary steakhouse wine. Is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Like these terms that we kind of throw out in the industry that really never bleed down to the retail level. I'm glad that we're having this conversation because we're talking about some of those terms. And yeah, I mean, you'd never throw in that term in a retail setting, but you and I would talk about that openly. I'm glad we're having that conversation because it's the thing that a lot of people don't see. It's pulling back the curtain. Because very much we talk about a Chardonnay that, is very showy, but maybe isn't, technically great. It's very pretty. It's not going to age. It doesn't have enough acidity to carry off its fireworks. That's a nice Christmas dinner wine because we know everybody's going to buy it in November, drink it December 25th, and we don't have to worry about the fact that bastard isn't going to age at all. I like some of the shop talk bleeding in because we really haven't talked about that very much on the show. And it's really something that I think the average consumer never sees, and that's absolutely by design. But I like that we almost, as people in the industry, very much have our own language and things where if I said, oh, this is a very Calgary wine, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. But most people would say, oh, what do you mean a very Calgary wine? Well, I mean, it's about a $40 Cabernet from California. It's got a shitload of oak and alcohol in it. You know exactly what I mean. But most people wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think we tasted something the other day, and I used the term a big, slutty California Chard. And you knew exactly what I was talking about before.
And I liked it for being so slutty, yes.
And it is what it is. It's like you like those big, rich, full, heavily oaked wines. But people get confused with the term like, oh, it's oaky. It's like not necessarily like those cheap California Chardonnays that taste like a 2x4. It's a textural thing. It's a character. You get the spices and the extra flavors that not necessarily would, but it comes from the barrels. And you and I know that, and that's why I'm like, oh, this is a big slutty California Chard. And it's like it is what it's. And maybe this is the wrong thing to do, but I've often, it's like, the character of wines. It's like masculine or feminine. How that comes off, and it's like
it's
people
so
are like,
stupid.
Like, no, it totally is. Or it's like, oh, this is like sporty.
Oh wow,
spice.
Barbaresco is so much more feminine than Barolo. No, that's the most ridiculous, most stupid thing I've ever heard in my life. It completely depends on the producer. It depends on whether they consider Barbaresco or Barolo their specialty. It's the dumbest thing.
When you and I are talking, you're like, well, what is it? I'm like, oh, it's more like, that's why I say the Bardolino is...
No, it's not even good. No, exactly. It's stupid. It's stupid all the way down.
But like Valpolicella to Bardolino, as a generalization, I'd say Bardolino is more feminine. Now, what does that exactly mean if you broke it down? But when I say that, you understand what I'm trying to say. And that's the hardest part for people, like when you're learning to taste wine and study wine, is trying to find that wine speak language, how we can talk. How do you describe what's in your mouth and how you're feeling? Like all the characters, like the intensity, the weight on your palate, like all the characters is like, that's part of the reason why we go to wine school, is learn how to talk about them together and find a common language between how do you describe what you just sipped on.
Which creates this amazing group speak. Like no one would ever understand our actual like inside like wine industry talk to a point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to take a brief break. You and I, Warren. We will have you back in a sec. We're going to talk about what we have coming up next week for stuff. So next week, for those of you who join us for the beer tasting next week, and I promised this super cool Tail Gunner IPA. Apparently, I lied. I did. That is very true. I had said that I would have the new West Coast IPA from Tail Gunner. I will not. I had promised this thing. I did not realize that it was not going to be canned until Sunday afternoon. I thought that I could pick it up at the brewery tomorrow and have it available for everybody like tomorrow afternoon. No, that's not the case at all. So we are still going to have Blake from Tail Gunner. We are still going to have Morgan Rattray from Untapped Beer Imports. And we're still going to have the Godspeed Brewery lineup. But I promised you an IPA. I just happen to have this Table Ghost Cabin New England IPA with Strata hops. This is my way of an apology. I was wrong. I screwed up the timing. It's 100% on me. I fucked it up. But we're still going to have an awesome tasting. It's going to be really fun. We still have this amazing Ontario-based brewery that does these super cool Japanese-focused beers. We're going to throw in a cabin beer. Does it fit our theme in any way? No, it doesn't. I had an idea. It was a good idea. It didn't work out, but we're still going to throw in a fourth beer, and it's going to be a great beer. I've had this beer. It's really good. So it should be good. Next up.
Wait, what's the theme, though?
Well, I've ruined the theme. What's the theme? I've ruined the theme. The theme is I ruined the theme. Keep up, Aaron. This promo's going to be great. All right, and then coming up this Friday, I need those pieces of paper you stole from me, Aaron.
Oh. There you go.
So coming up on Friday, we're going to do a redemption tasting. We are going to redeem Hepburn's Choice. Now, what do I mean by this? Hepburn's Choice is the bottom of the range for the Hunter Lang independent bottling series. So you know Hunter Lang for first edition bottlers. You know them for Old Malt Cask. You know them for Platinum Edition. They've a bunch of others, but Hepburn's Choice has always been the entry-level series, and they launched them into North America, and they hit with a resounding thud. The whiskeys weren't really interesting. The customer response was non-existent. My level of passion was in the negative values. It was a bit of a miss. So they're relaunching the whole thing. They've updated the packaging, by which I mean they've added this nice silver trim at the top. They've added full color labels finally.
It looks nice.
It looks nice, but more than that, I got the chance to try the Craigellachie and the Tamdhu earlier today. They're vastly improved. The reason that I kind of wanted to talk about this series, and I really did believe this was going to be in November, but COVID has really borked international shipping. Lee Hansen and I were sitting on his back patio 3 meters apart, tasting whiskey back in the last week of August, first week of September, and we were talking about how the Langs wanted to remake Hepburn's Choice. They wanted it to be more interesting, more engaging. They wanted it to be something that people would be proud to take home, very much in the same vein as Old Malt Cask first editions. And I think they've succeeded. Now, I was the biggest critic in the world of Hepburn's Choice. When it came out, I thought they'd missed the mark. I thought they'd done a bad job of making these whiskeys. They fixed it. Now again, I've only had 2. Maybe these are terrible. I don't know, but won't it be fun finding out together? These 2 are great. From everything I've heard, both from Andrew off camera and from Lee Hansen, they have fixed the line. Hepburn's Choice should be a really exciting line that we're going to be working with through 2021. I'm excited to present them. They're substantially discounted. I want to walk through just briefly. I'm not going to go through all the prices. They're all about $20 off a can. They're all massively reduced. I really like them. I think it'll be a fun event. It's gonna be me and Hanson just hanging out, drinking scotch. It's gonna be good.
For about $300.
Yeah, you can get all 4 for about $300, down from $375.
Nice.
It's gonna be a nice night. Let's just quickly rip through the comments here, see how it's going. Every wine tasting with Kyle, wine epiphany. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I'm not sure if that's sarcastic, but I kind of hope it is. That would be funnier. And raisins. Raisins is a good call. Actually, even though this isn't made with dried grapes, I do actually get raisins on this Bardolino, which is interesting. Strawberry, raspberry, I agree. Custard. Do you get custard on this, Warren? Do you get custard on the Bardolino?
I don't actually have a bottle in front of me, but it's custard. I'm going to keep that in mind next time. It never jumped out at me, but I'm going to keep that in mind next time I taste a bottle of it, for sure. What I like about that wine, it's just, I think it's tremendous value for what it is. It's elegant. It's pretty. Like if you try to find a Pinot Noir at this price point, it's going to be thin and washed out, no personality. I like that. Lots of fruit, easy drinking, drink it on its own, drink it with lighter dishes, drink it with seafood. It's just such a pretty wine, and it's got that nice Italian bright acidity. Keeps it lively and fresh. So you get bright fruit, but it comes off with a nice dry finish. So I can see where you're getting that that character of the raisins and whatnot, and reminiscent of, like I say, like a Valpolicella. But as we go into the next wine here, La Ca Nova, I love this wine. When I first tasted it, it was 2015 vintage, and it was quite different in character than the 16 is. That's what I'm drinking right now. That's what's in my glass, and this is a little bit more indicative of the region, of what you would expect to get out of this area, reminiscent of that Valpolicella or Amarones. And Amarones can be quite a different beast depending on the producer, and the very traditional ones can be quite elegant and light compared to those commercial ones that we're used to in the market.
They're very chunky and dense and chocolatey and a bit of a mess, really. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a little bit, and because they're trying to do so much, it comes off as almost simple and lacking complexity. Whereas this is what I would refer to as this 2016. The 15 was a little bit hotter vintage, a little bit more opulent, a little bit more rich. It reminded me of the wines of Verona, but it drank a little more something like it was from Maremma, like a Super Tuscan. In the case
Warren,
of this,
sorry, I'm going to jump in just for a sec. I've actually got something that demands my attention over at the cash register. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to let you finish your thought. I will be right back.
So the Ca Nova, with this wine, it's 100% Corvina. So it's different than you're going to find a typical Ripasso, but it's not going to be totally foreign. It's going to be, if you're a Ripasso fan or an Amarone fan, it's reminiscent of that with its character, and you get that kind of dried fruit and raisin and chocolatey characters, but it's more complex and more finished. They don't dry the grapes out for this, so there's no DOC classification or DOCG classification on this that would make it fit in that category. So you see, if you flip around on the back label, you'll see it's an IGT wine, meaning it gives them a little bit more flexibility and creativity of what they want to do with the wine. So this, as you say, 100% varietal, grown 100% on their estate, everything done by hand. And with this, they age it partially in stainless steel vats and partially in French barriques for a total of 12 months, and then blend together, and the wine tells them what they want to do with it. And with that, you get that reminiscent of those characters of, if you're a Ripasso fan, if you're like the Amarones and whatnot. But to me, I like the complexity and the polished finish on this wine. And once again, I think tremendous value. Like, I did taste some of their other wines that they make, but the selections we have here, I think they're a great standout for what they are. And like I say, the 15 compared to the 16 vintage-wise, the 15 was a little bit more opulent, a little bit more round, and a little bit bigger. This has a little bit more traditional character of the region for sure, but really like them. And then what else are we talking about? Are we coming back on?
Apparently I took this into...
Yeah, we're trying here, man.
There we go.
There we go. You should be good.
Yeah, much better.
And we're back.
And we're back. Sorry about that.
So yeah, as I was saying, like this, it's like you get that it reminds you of those traditional wines that we're familiar with from Verona, being like the Amarones and the Ripassos. But compared to a Ripasso, you still get that kind of chocolatey raisin character, dried fruit. Like it comes off like that, but it's more refined, more complex, more finished. It's more of a proper wine to me.
I got to talk to the folks from Tedeschi last spring, actually. They make a wine called Madernigo, which is a non-dried grape Valpolicella that actually clocks in at 14.5. It's a very big wine. One of the things we're starting to see out of these Corvina Veroneses and the like, I've actually had a Rondinella done this style as well. They're trying to make wines that don't have to be dried to actually be good. They want to make these big, powerful, potent, fully ripened wines, not quite an American or Australian style, but not that far off from it either, but without, leaning on the crutch of drying grapes. The idea that through really controlled grape yields and really controlled winemaking practices, we can make wines that are just as big as an Amarone, but we don't have to go through the crutch of drying the grapes. And I love that they're getting into that. And also, this is absolutely massive. Like, this tastes like an Amarone. It's huge. And it's only 13.5. I don't believe it's 13.5. I think it's about 14.6. But this says 13.5 on the label. Yeah,
like I think I'll go back to something that catches me as well, that I always care, that grabs me, is you have that lady winemaker touch to them, and they tend to impart more feminine character, which makes them better food wines. There's more elegance behind them. And you're right, it's like you get that ripeness, you get that big body to it, and it's like, you look at it, it's like, it seems like a very big wine for only 13.5% alcohol.
I don't know about that particularly, but I will say that I do know that this is something that this particular part of the world is trying to do more of, to establish themselves as premium, fuller-bodied winemakers without leaning on the idea of an Amarone or leaning on the idea of a Ripasso. I can't say I've really had enough wines from this area of Italy that have been made by men versus women and say that there's a stylistic difference between the two, if there is at all. But I will say that I've noticed this idea of, let's get away from drying grapes. Let's get away from this idea of Amarone is the premium wine that we can make, and let's refocus on not making watery Valpolicella. Let's get away from making cheap, thin wines. Let's get back into taking just a tenth, well, not a tenth. A tenth would be that tenth is an ice wine level. A fifth of or a third to a fifth of the levels of cropping on a particular vineyard. And let's actually make more concentrated wines off the same land and to make better wines.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Like what I mean by when I say masculine, feminine, male winemakers to female winemakers, you get those big production wines when they're making wine for a style, for a consumer, and they're chasing maybe points or something like that, where you get the wines that I work with, the producers in my portfolio, such as Gorgo, they're making the wines that the fruit is telling them to make. It's that hands-off approach to properly made wines that just develop their own finesse and their own character to them. And when you do get that little bit lighter alcohol and a little bit more finesse with them, they tend to play better with food. And that's why, as you know, like those big, especially commercial style, over-the-top, big, fat Amarones, what can you really eat with them? You have a big chunk of meat with intense port reduction, gastrique, or something like that. They're so intense, but other than that, it's like a lot of foods they just beat up on the dish. So I learned about wine from working with great chefs and working in great restaurants and understanding, the first thing that I got into and kind of my forte with wines, I think, has always been pairing wine with food and what's going to work the best. And when you taste something, it's what jumps into your head. What do I want to eat with this? What does this taste like? What is it looking for? And, that's still to this day, that's like every time I taste wines with somebody, I'm like, oh, what's this going to taste good with? It's, and that's very much the Italian way. It's like, if you were at an Italian household and they said, "Oh, can I get you something to drink?" You ask for a glass of red wine. They'll go to the kitchen and make you something to eat before they'll pour you a glass, because they're like, you can't drink it by itself. It's just wrong.
So, what did you like tonight of the four that we had? What's your ranking if you had to give these one? What would you, in terms of how much you'd love to have it in your glass right this second?
Do you know what? I'm enjoying this glass I got. And as I say, I'm drinking the Corvina, and I'm drinking it because it's the only one in the Gorgo lineup that I have left on my rack right now. But partly because it's new, and when I just want to have a glass of wine, I tend to sway more towards whites and rosés. The San Michelin is just a standout for me. I think it's stunning. I think it's got so much finesse. I like the minerality in it. I like the elegance. I like the acidity. It's got life. It's refreshing, and it's complex.
That's actually my standout for the night as well. My number one is the San Michelin.
And I can't wait to get the Chiaretto, the Rosé in again, because that wine, I drink a lot of that. I love the Bardolino because when I was in Italy on the trip when I met the producer, at the end of the day, usually you're running through the day and you're tasting, and you go from one producer to the next, and it's like, it's a very packed day, but I always found myself at the end of the day, I want a glass of Bardolino because it's light and it's refreshing, and it's so pleasing. And
it has such an amazing sense of place. You drink Bardolino and it's like, it is too much salt to be Valpolicella. It's too simple to be much of anything else, but it's so charming and light and delicate, and just Bardolino is just a joy. It really is. I know that it's the ultimate pizza wine is actually become at this point like the ultimate wine meme. It's the stupidest thing. Everybody says everything is the ultimate pizza wine. But I mean, Bardolino's cheap and it's wonderful, and it's got so much character, and it's got salinity and fruit and acidity, and it's so pretty. I don't know. I like Bardolino as like just a solid sub $20 consistently great Italian red.
Absolutely.
Because let's be fair, an Italian Valpol that you actually want to drink these days is $20 or above.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's lots of Italian Valpol less than $20. Can you think of one you'd want to drink?
Not so much.
Not so much.
We're getting commercial producers generally. Like all these wines, I just love them. But as I say, like right now, have been drinking the most of and most excited about the San Michelin, the new one. I think there's so much going on to it. But, having said that, it totally depends on my mood, because I'm sure you're like me. You always want to have something different in your glass.
You do.
But, I've been really enjoying that guy, and I'm enjoying my Corvina, but I also, going to make something to eat here pretty quick too. But
you haven't eaten yet, Warren. That feels like a mistake.
Well, it's been a busy day dealing with producers and looking up some new wines that I'm interested in, and inventory stuff. As I've been mentioning, I've been locked up in my house all week, but at the same time, it's been a great week to catch up. I don't have my kids here, and it's just been, good time to catch up and look towards the new year. And as rough as 2020's been, it's been pretty good to me. A lot of good things have happened. A lot of challenging things have happened. But, I think at the top of the list, you find out who your real friends are, and you get closer with your family, and you get more intimate with everybody who are your real friends. And through the miracle of things like Skype and FaceTime and all these things, we can be with somebody without actually being in the same room with them. And, I got to say, as well as people who sell wine and alcohol, we're doing pretty good these days, because everybody seems to be embracing their inner alcoholism, and to some extent, without getting too carried away, I hope. But, if considering all the things going on in the world, we're pretty fortunate. We just happen to be in the right business these days. So, it's a good.
You've officially done now your first online tasting. How do you think it went?
Yeah, it's great. This is super fun. I'm not structured with my tastings at all.
No, neither am I.
And I think they shouldn't be too structured, because to me, it's is wine. Wine is made for enjoyment. It's made to enhance your experience. It's made to go with food. And like they say, wine's only as good as the company you enjoy it with. And I think that's true.
All right, well, I'll ask you to stick around for a few minutes, like through my wrapping up. But I'll ask you for a couple of final thoughts before I close this thing off.
Sure. Couple final thoughts. Wow. Buy lots of Gorgo.
Well, that's a wine rep for you, folks. Yes.
No, I think as you say, it's we gotta enjoy what we are drinking, and it's nice to see people in our world getting more interested in real wines. And when I say real wines, they're not commercial wines, they're not mass-produced wines.
You can just say apothic red. It's been a punching bag on this channel for like months.
Absolutely, and why shouldn't we?
Ketchup and alcohol.
But I think it's my mantra to find wines that over-deliver for the price, and I think that's what I found in this brand for sure. And I'm happy to be the guy that gets to bring them into the country, And I'm very grateful to see your support and have them on your shelf and share them with your customers and your friends. And I hope everybody enjoys them as much as I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Warren. I really appreciate this. Hold tight. We'll debrief after this thing is over because I'm going to wrap this up in the next minute or so. Just going to quickly get through the comments real fast and just check on rankings. So I want to see if anybody's wildly wrong. Not that anybody's going to be wildly wrong. We don't have wrong answers. Only the ones I choose are wrong because I want to make fun of people I like. Cricket 2314. Yeah, okay. I can dig that. Rob right on the heels. Lindsay at 2431, 4213. Don at... Oh, Don's I really like it. 2314. That's the same as Craig's. I'm not that far away from that. Jeremy also at 2314. Yeah, all right. Well, I think we're going to wrap her there, folks. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you've learned a lot, or at least something. I had a lot of fun. I enjoy hanging out with Warren. It's always a good time. I absolutely love this winery. I particularly love this wine. Out of tonight, I've come to deeply, deeply respect this Bardolino, and honestly, to a point, really come to respect the standard, like much cheaper version of the Custoza more. This is going to be a take it or leave it wine. For me, it's my number 4. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's the most expensive thing, and that has nothing to do with my ranking. It's very big on a table of light aromatic wines, and I know exactly who that wine is targeted to, and it's my dad, and it's people who really like big, full-bodied wines, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I'm going to take the first 3 for me, and that's just my style. Thank you all, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton. We'll see some of you Wednesday night, other of you Friday night next week, and I hope all of you for December 18th, our champagne tasting to be announced, because if you thought tonight was a mess, oh lordy, Champagne Week is going to be a thing. Oh God, we've spent so much time on Champagne Week. Yeah, I can't say anything yet, but yeah, Champagne Week's going to be something special. Thank you all so much. Good night.